Before that, she ran an entertainment business and studied philosophy at Macquarie University. Since learning about the climate and ecological emergency, she's been a leader in the movement, participating in many powerful acts of civil resistance, including, many of you may have read about, the burning of the pram at Parliament House in Canberra. This symbolized the fear of a generation of having children in the face of government's failure in their duty of care. Recently, she blocked the Harbour Bridge with that's in Sydney with a firefighter, an opera singer, and a fellow philosopher. For this, she was sentenced to 15 months in prison, causing a global outrage. Violet is currently out on bail, appealing the sentence, and her appeal date is 15th of March. So I'm sure she'd love some support around that date if you're in the area. All right, well, yeah, huge thanks to you, Violet, for turning up and giving the time tonight, and I'll hand it over to you.
Oh, thanks so much. And thank you so much for having me and inviting me, and very humbled to meet you all. I love being in a Zoom with people I haven't met. That's really exciting. Often when we get caught in our working groups, it's the same 5 people. So it's really lovely to see a whole new group of people who are committed. And yeah, I was saying when you know this crew first reached out, I was like, oh my gosh, of course I wanted to speak to Aotearoa, because when we do our national dates, you know, you are the one who sort of kick off the whole world. And so we wake up and we're like, oh, you've done the thing. And then we're like getting ready to go out and sipping our coffee and feeling like, oh, you know, there's more early morning action starts, and seeing your photos and your actions obviously inspire us. So thank you for those that have participated in those over the last few years. I'm sure I've seen photos and videos and live streams of a few of you. So I'm Violet Coco. I guess a little bit about my history, as sort of was mentioned. I studied philosophy at Macquarie University, and you know, in that, philosophy is a sort of discipline which looks at what it is to be a good person. It also looks at different types of democracy. It also looks at what it is to be a person at all, like what is autonomy, what does it mean to like be an agent of self. And I think all of these things really fed into where I am right now. But it was at this time when I was at uni, my sister calls me up because she was thinking about having her first child. And she says, Violet, I'm so concerned about the climate emergency. And I said, yeah, me too. And she's like, no, I'm really worried. And I was like, yeah, I'm worried too. But I wasn't really worried. I wasn't thinking about it. It wasn't my problem because I wasn't a politician. I wasn't a scientist. And so it was like, oh yeah, sure, climate change, whatever. I felt disempowered. It wasn't my, and it wasn't until I went to a Heading for Extinction talk in Melbourne quite a few years later that was my problem, that there's nowhere to run, that it's coming, it's real, it's big, it's imminent, and that I actually have a hell of a lot of power, and we as a community have a hell of a lot of power to affect change. So later that year, or just in the turning of that year, we had those massive bushfires throughout Australia, and indeed around the world. And you know, it was so much of our country was on fire that the smoke encircled the globe. And in fact, still, I just and that smoke's like very damaging cognitively, and especially to young children. And just recently, I was in one of the areas that was heavily burnt out in the Blue Mountains, and it's still a graveyard. Like it's quiet and it's sad, and so, you know, these areas that we're losing, these ecosystems, this eco collapse, it takes decades, centuries, you know, for this to develop and grow, and we've lost, you know, having species collapse where, you know, we're having Australia is one of leading the way in mammal extinction, and you know, there's no bringing these beautiful creatures back, and which are such vital parts of our land. And yeah, so I got going, and the fires really put a fire up my self, and I started running a bunch of trainings and talks. I was doing 3 talks a week for months, which was really hectic to be talking about the gravitas of the situation almost every night of the week. But we did it, and we built a massive movement around Extinction Rebellion, and also participated in many actions, many cheeky rebellious things, many signs on the side of the road, many creative actions. I can't tell you the amount of time I've dumped stuff over me, or climbed into dirty water to be drowning, and all this sort of stuff. And also in the process of that, I've been arrested 28 times now, if you count the time I was carried away in court in my most recent sentencing. I have experienced burnout, and I think that that's something we can all relate to, who's been in this work. I think we feel the gravitas of this situation so much that we can give so much of ourselves. And I'm a big advocate of, and we'll talk today hopefully about regenerative culture as well, and how to survive repression and take care of ourselves and heal ourselves. And so there's one point in my life where I have I knew that my phone was in my pocket, but I put it in the washing machine anyway. Like, it was a sort of split brain scenario where I just needed to get rid of this phone just so I could have a holiday. And so these crazy things happen, but we carry through, and we keep connecting, and we keep connecting with each other, and keep coming back, because disconnection is what they use to repress us. They give us these bail conditions which make us disconnect. And so this tells us the thing that we have is connection. And so we have to keep connecting with each other. And that's why I'm so grateful to be here connecting with you today. So yeah, through all this, like coming back to it, I was like, man, we've got a short amount of time, and I just need to know how to do this well. And so I stuck my nose in the books and started looking throughout history and the history of social change, and looking at how we instigate that, and learned about the Overton window, which is like the appropriate public response. Yeah, I got a lot of nods. This is probably old news to a lot of you, but I got to cover it for the newbies. Sorry, folks. But the Overton window is the appropriate response to an issue. So basically, we are herd animals, and we have sort of like the middle road of what most people are doing, and then you get a little bell curve of what other people will do. And so on the edge here, you have the trailblazers. And I realized that we need to be the trailblazers. We need to be the alarm. We need to be setting the trend so the herd will follow us, and follow this appropriate response. Because for anybody who's read any Joanna Macy, potentially you've heard about like the 3 stories that we have going on. We've got the business as usual story, which is, everything is fine, keep going. We've got the death story, which is that, everything's fucked and there's no point in doing it. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to swear, sorry, but I don't know, that's me. It's time to swear. No, so you got the death story. Some people have given up. I also find in this one, like, I've done my time. Like, I'm an elder now. I did that one forest blockade, and so I can just sit back and relax. So I don't know, my future, I'm going to say, please join us. So you've got, anyway, this death story, like, everything's fucked. I'm just going to sit back and enjoy life, hedonistic, whatever. And then you've got the great turning, which is what we're trying to create. That's why we're here, why we're all here in this room, is because we've committed ourselves on a Thursday evening to be a part of the great turning. So a big acknowledgement to all of you for continuing that. Okay, so this trailblazing, this like edge of the bell curve here, This is the radical flank effect. Anybody, can I get a like, yeah, we know that one? Yeah, a few of you. Yeah, cool. So this is about sort of demonstrating the appropriate response, I guess. And then you have this sort of petering off of like the rest of the situation. So when XR first came in the scene, they had they were like the radical flank to the Greens party, or do you have a Greens party in Aotearoa? Yeah, cool. So so we were they were the radical flank, we are the radical flank, right? And then now this A22 network has popped up and said, actually, we're going to be the radical flank because XR has become decentralized, and so they're sort of doing a lot of more creative action. It's sort of, I don't know, it's a bit wishy-washy at this point. I think that what the UK have done is just really interesting, like purposefully positioning themselves one in from the A22, which, you know, but still planning a disruptive action. I think that's like, they're just like pulling the wool over. It's, anyway, they're just sort of like, anyway, I think it's great, but very clever. A lot of people have got their nose at a joint because obviously we know as the radical flank, and they do too, but I think they're trusting that we understand the strategy. And so we got to stick together and be smart. Anyway, so when we were sort of talking about this radical flank effect, me and my crew, we realized, you know, being the radical flank, that we would be facing prison, and that was sort of an inevitable thing. In fact, after my first Heading for Extinction talk, I distinctly remember having a good old huddle, knowing that was sort of the outcome that was going to happen. Like, oh God, I know how committed I am now, and I'm definitely going to end up in prison. And here I am a few years later, fulfilling my fears. Anyway, so we said, okay, we're going to end up in prison. So we created a strategy and we called it the dance strategy. It's called disruption and non-compliance escalation dance. So you're committed to dance. You're a dancer, would you say? If you are committed to non-violent civil resistance, over and over and over and over and over again until you cannot possibly anymore because the state has repressed you so much. So that's either that you're on like highly repressive bail conditions or in prison. And since we knew that was coming, we're like, okay, so that's coming. So what we want to do is we want to sort of, we want to put ourselves in a position where we've got the power. And so we looked throughout history at what people have done to like gather this power around this understanding that high level civil resistance often equals prison. We're hoping not, hopefully it doesn't, but there it is, it happens. And so I'm living proof. And so, so we go, all right, so how do we gather this power? So what we decided to do was we decided to draw a line in the sand and say, we're not going to sign bail conditions that prohibit us from protesting. Okay, so if a bail condition says you cannot protest or you cannot associate with your crew that you need to protest or anything like that, we'd be like, we're not signing, no way. And the first few times this happened, the court would be like, what? Okay. And then they'd like let us out the back door because it was Canberra and they're really soft there. And eventually we sort of were not signing enough that they were like, oh, if you know, we're going to have to put you in prison. And we're like, mm-hmm. And so my first prison stint was after the burning pram. It was 2 weeks in prison, and I refused to sign bail. And I did that because I thought, well, I'm giving myself the power with prison. I'm going to go and I'm empower myself to check this place out before I get sentenced. And so if any point I want to leave, I can sign and get out of there, right? But I can test it out in my own power. Okay, so this is dancing, right? So I spent the full 2 weeks until my my bail appeal. And at the bail appeal, the magistrate says, get every single bail condition off this woman. When, you know, it doesn't matter if she signs or not, get her out of prison today. No bail condition for you. So not bail, it's what the Freedom Riders did. So that's how they filled the prison with the Freedom Riders. Yeah. So jump forward a year or so later. I am a part of the A22 network, the Radical Flank, and we are blocking roads to call out for a sovereign aerial firefighter fleet. Basically, our country catches fire a lot and our firefighters don't have the tools that they need to protect us in the climate breakdown. And I get on this truck with a firefighter. I'm given super repressive bail conditions. I did have to sign because half my team had COVID, and so we didn't have the admin support to be doing a prison situation at that time. So I signed bail, came out, I was on 24-hour house arrest. And I just want to really acknowledge, like, this kind of repression, it really hurts. I spent like 4 months, from April to December last year, I couldn't get out of my chair. I was so burnt out. I couldn't get out. All I could do was read and play Spider, which is like 8-deck solitaire. And that's all I could do. That's all I could do. And that's, you know, we've got to be honest, but I knew how to heal myself. This is what I called a wintering. You know, I was like, okay, well, I'm obviously burnt out. I'm going to winter. I'm just going to close all my windows and doors, and I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to do a lot of meditating, do a lot of yoga. And then I get to a point where I'm like, I'm done with this. I call up my lawyer. I said, all right, just guilty pleas for everything. Get me through it. Okay, so off I go to court. And then 15 months in prison. What? From a 25-minute road disruption. Insane. I didn't process that. I knew going in, I was like, okay, well, best case scenario, I get off, or CCO, CRO, whatever. The second case scenario is they're going to give me a really extravagant sentence, and then I'll spend 2 weeks in prison and I'll do appeal, and then I'll get out on bail appeal. And that's what happened. So even going in, I was like, I'm only here for 2 weeks, I'll get out. But it caused this beautiful backfire effect, and that backfire effect, humbly, like, you know, it could have been any of us that this happened to. We've all, like, any of us who've engaged in high-level civil resistance. I don't think that I'm particularly special. I just happen to be in the right place at the right time, or potentially I've poked enough times that once they had to bite. But because we've had 3 people sentenced to about 3 months prison and 1 sentenced to a year prison already as climate activists, but it didn't have the same effect. Potentially, these are the reasons why I think that I elicited a backfire offense. The duration of the sentence, the time of year, the fact that it was the end of the year, potentially people had things wrapping up, they were paying more attention, they were thinking about Christmas, blah, blah, blah. The fact that it's one face. So there's this interesting scenario where people, so they've done marketing research where if you sort of say a whole village is going to be saved if you donate $5 a month, that is less effective than if you say donate $10 a month to save this one child and give them the one face. So I know we've got 20 people in the UK at the moment held in remand since November. That's like pre-trial for an organizing Zoom. I'm not sure why people aren't up in arms about that, but I am. But I think potentially maybe it's, you know, that one face versus a group scenario. My demographic, I'm a young woman, and that people, because I've done all of these talks and these trainings, and I've been a mobilizer is what we call it. We called it back in the day. If that's sort of my, like, I don't know, is that 15 minutes? How long was that? Yeah, all right.
Yeah, that's about right. That's great.
Great. Thanks for listening.
Cool. Thank you, Violet. I think you've given us so much there, which will be interesting jumping off points for questions. We've had one question through in the chat, which is great. Thanks. I'll come to that question. So free to feed more through in the chat. But I'll start off with some of the questions we already prepared. Cool. So to that window. Yeah, so be interested to hear you talk about the backfire effect, which is of course when state repression strengthens the cause and it backfires on the state. Yeah. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more specifically, like what forms you've seen that take, and in what ways that has strengthened the movements you're in.
Yeah, thanks. I think we're in a really interesting time as well, because we're coming out of COVID and people are starting to organize together. So it's almost, perfect timing in that way, that a chance to connect with their groups again and to organize again because of this outrage. So we're seeing local groups reform. And we saw local groups reform. We saw protests around Australia in sizes that we haven't seen since pre-COVID times. And that seems to be continuing. So, for example, we tried to mobilize our capital city, Canberra. We had zero hope before I got there. There was very few people attending protests. And last week they had 100 people go to a bike ride, which is just insanely beautiful. The other thing that sort of the effect is that obviously on the negative side is that people are afraid to protest in some ways. They think, oh, well, in New South Wales anyway, which is where these repressive laws have come in. They think, oh, you can't protest in New South Wales anymore, is a narrative that's coming through. Oh, sorry, I'm getting a call. Hold on. Okay, I'm back. Signal going off. Ooh. Never ends. Okay, so yeah, so I think and potentially, like, I thought this question was more about the effect of our actions. Was that part of it originally as well? Yeah. So these actions that we took, the original, we were sitting on the road once a week, every week for 7 weeks leading up to our election. And so what that did was it made sure that climate was on the news, because they were saying, oh, when are these rascal protesters going to come back up? But it was when are these environmental protesters going to come up? Or, so it's like, every day we're getting in this, like, this messaging of the appropriate response, this, like this sounding the alarm, this bell of mindfulness. And what we found, we have a rise of conservative Greens that are called teals in Australia. And we had sort of their movement people being like, oh, it's so awful what these protesters are doing, but we're definitely going to vote for climate and vote for the planet. And so we created this sort of we created this radical flank effect, where then the people who were running as climate independents were the heroes of the day. And I don't mind being hated, as long as I'm effective. Like, that's sort of my mentality. I've got a planet to save. I'm not here to be popular. So I'm about displaying. So this comes back to my philosophy. It's about deeds, not words. That's a suffragette's quote, deeds, not words. And it's about embodied cognition. So it's about, showing with my body the fear and the threat that I feel. And that's all gets through to people. Yeah, I think that's
awesome. I'll ask a couple more questions, then pick up the audience questions. So yeah, keep them coming through. Cool. So yeah, I wanted to ask you, most people don't do direct action, of course, in any form. And for you having been arrested 28 times, that's you've taken direct action further than probably most of the people in this call, it's safe to say. And I think that people sometimes look at people such as yourself and think that you're different, that maybe you have some kind of qualities, perhaps some courage or confidence or resilience or passion that they're lacking. So I wanted to ask you if you think that's the case, or if you think what's ability to take action is something that you've developed, and if so, how?
Good question. Courage is such a interesting thing, because I think with courage, I consider myself a very fearful person. I feel a lot of fear, and potentially, the people activated in our movement are also fearful people, because we fear the collapse of our livable planet, and that is what motivates us. But courage is not sort of fear. Courage is sort of saying, hello, fear, how are you today? Hi, I'm holding you, but gonna do it anyway. And that is a philosophy I learned from my teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Buddhist monk. And I think that practice of meditation and mindfulness is really key to my strength, because being able to be centered in the breath as a tool for grounding, that can't be taken away from me. As long as I live, I have my breath, and therefore that is my strongest asset as a grounding tool. So I think many times in my life I've been like, what am I doing? But when I stop and really ground myself in what's going on and all of the research that I've done, I know that we are engaging in the appropriate response. And so that is something that gives me courage, is knowing that when I face an action, I force myself beforehand to accept the worst. So before I burnt the pram, the night before, I was terrified that they would think that this incendiary situation was too threatening and they would shoot me. So I accepted that and went in. So I own it. I own the worst situation, and I do it for myself. I do it because I know my path and I know who I want to be in this world. I've made that decision. I don't do it because other people say I should. I do it because I've made this decision. So I think that gives me a bit of strength. I also acknowledge my privilege. So as I was saying at the start of this call, Australia is one of the most heavy-handed and repressive people, and I have, when I first rocked up to the Australian First Nations tent embassy, and I said, to the caretaker ID, I was like, I've been arrested 15 times or whatever on the front line. And she goes, oh, is that all? And I said, oh, are you an activist too? And she's like, nah, I'm just Indigenous. So acknowledging my privilege, that maybe the only reason that I haven't done time, or that I, am in a situation where I have experienced a education and all that stuff, is because of my privilege, and that potentially it is, my duty to sacrifice that as a good person in the situation that we're in. So I'm sure many people will want to discuss that particular avenue, and maybe I'm not 100% politically correct in that, but it comes from the heart. I definitely expect it to hurt. I expect what we do to hurt. I don't expect it to be fun. I don't expect it. We do our best to make it fun for each other, but you got to take time to heal. So I observe the regenerative culture, this cycle: action, celebration, reflection and learning, then rest, dreaming, planning for more action. This beautiful cycle that we have that has come through the Extinction Rebellion learnings. So acknowledging that time, that it takes time to heal, and taking that time for ourselves. One of my rebel aunties, I think I wouldn't take this much time off, but she takes like 6 months off a year in little chunks, like three month chunks. And I'm like, good on you, Auntie Jane. But I'm probably maybe don't need as much of that. Maybe I do. I don't know. So community care is the other thing I want to say about this. So, your local group is your family, and they can be extremely dysfunctional. I know it. Gosh, it is very difficult to deal with a bunch of people who are very disparate, especially y'all white men, sorry, but you're very challenging sometimes. And sorry. Activist. Anyway, so yeah, so I think, you know, but I love them, and there are so many beautiful beautiful people of all kinds in our community, and even when they're annoying, and I'm sure I am annoying. I'm sure I'm annoying some of you right now. But you know, you have to love your group to stay courageous, because I could not do what I do without my family around me, my activist family around me. I would be nothing without them. That's just the truth. And so yeah, so community care, and part of community care, this is my last point on this, which I think is really important, which is to feed each other. That's it. You know, like if I'm suffering and someone brings me a sweetie treaty, I feel so much better. So that's that.
Cool, thank you. Maybe the final question from me. You know, there are people here in this call who I know are actually pretty keen on pushing their direct action to the point of doing prison time, as you have done. And there are also probably people on this call who are considering maybe taking arrestable action for the first time, or whether it's taking action again in a way that maybe would have serious consequences. So I guess I'd be curious if there's anything that you could say kind of directly to those people who maybe feel like they're facing that decision, or you know, on the edge of the precipice of, you know, taking that plunge. Yeah, what would you say to people who are kind of making that choice, maybe trying to summon the courage, or to just think well about the consequences?
Yeah, I think I sort of said a little bit in the last question what that would look like, but I think it's really important to remain humble in whatever we're doing, and to recognize that we ultimately act in service. We act in service to life, and so when it comes to facing prison, it can be very dehumanizing, especially if you come from privilege. You know, you have to beg for crumbs in prison. Miss, please have some hot water, miss. Hot water. Which can be a lot, like coming out and trying to give speeches after being so small. You know, it does change you. So just being allowing for these feelings, and I mean, this is how I handle it anyway. You know, I stay present. That's the Buddhist training in me. The meditative training is to stay in the present. And if I do feel loss, like that's one of the hardest things about being in there, is you're disconnected from your loved ones and your community. And so when I feel that loss, you know, I'm allowed to cry. I'm allowed to feel bad. And I just hold myself gently and say, it's okay, Violet, you know, be your own self-soother. These are all things that you can learn. I'd really recommend Thai Nhat Hanh's book, Pieces Every Step. That really gave me so much strength to heal myself and to hold myself through hard things. And he also writes a book about activism and how to be an activist as well. Be prepared. Things take time in prison, so it's going to take a while, but I carry with me now $200 so that you've got cash when you buy things, and I carry with me a list of contacts with me. So find out from your prison what information you need. So sometimes you need full name, phone number, and address to be able to add people to your phone contacts list. So just making sure that you're prepared by having this kind of information. Yeah, just connecting with nature wherever you can, appreciating it. When I was in prison, I had 2 little rainbow lorikeets come and visit me, and I'd save a little bit of my apple to share with them, so they'd come to my window and we'd have a little sing together. And that's sort of, you know, anything you can do to make yourself well in that space is the way to go. And also living in service of the people who are in there. Like, we all are here because we're concerned with justice as well, and understanding that prisons are ultimately incredibly unjust places. Like, they don't help. We know this. And so yeah, just like recognizing that the people in there, you can live in service to them, into being a part of their story in a positive and joyful way. And that's certainly what I did. Here we've got TVs in our prison, and so I make sure that during the ads I would exercise and this sort of stuff to keep my body well, and that was like a thing. And singing is the greatest strength you've got, because that's activating your breath and resonation and all this kind of stuff. And so I would really recommend everybody get a few good chants down. And often prisons and cells are quite resonant. And so the most beautiful place that I have ever sung is what we call the seventh circle of hell, which is the Sydney Remand Centre. And it is the most depressing and sad place in the world. Probably not in the world, but definitely that I've ever been to. And but it has the most beautiful resonance. And so that is a way that I could ultimately really change my reality in there, and everybody's reality, because then I had all the inmates saying, hey, sing us another one, so, we can gift beauty to those spaces.
Cool, thank you. I'm going to ask a couple of questions together because they're related to prison, the topic you're on. Someone was asking, then the prison system respond to you, the staff and the other prisoners? And kind of aligned with that question, what was your experience in prison like? Did you ever feel unsafe because of the guard or other prisoners? What did you do to pass the time?
Yeah, I had one prison guard say to me something that I feel is ultimately very true, which is like 99% of prison is just very boring. And the other 1%, it can be dangerous. I've never felt in danger in prison. And ultimately I have in the remand centre, and that was from the prison guards pushing me up against a wall and threatening me with violence and stuff. But that's them, and ultimately they've got cameras and all that sort of stuff. And we have had some of our protesters experience violence in the prisons. That's ultimate reality. One of our guys says, if you ride a bike and you've fallen off and hurt yourself, maybe there are situations where you've experienced pain in your life, and you can these are maybe ways that you can mentally get over that fear. But ultimately, it's not a great place. It's not a place you want to be. It's a very sad place. There's a lot of people in there who are who shouldn't be there, and who are very sad, and especially women's prison, there's a lot of mothers, which is very difficult to see them being, and they're trying to get contact with their babies outside, which is really hard. I get a bit of empathy, fatigue even sometimes. I'm like, oh my God, it hurts so much to want to help all of these people. But probably saying too much, and there's people going to attack me on social media for all this, but anyway, whatever. Charge on with the truth. What was it like? I had guards coming, and because I had hundreds of letters coming in for me, and so there was lots of media and stuff, and so they were really, I felt like a bit like a bird in a cage, which was really interesting, because they had the free birds coming to my cage, and then I had humans coming and observing me like I was a bird in a cage, like, why are you here? Anyway, but the women mostly are really beautiful. To pass the time, I wrote letters to people. I strategized. I found really helpful working on my speech that I would say when I got out. I was like, that's just forward thinking, and that grounded me in why I was there as well. So I noticed that Roger Hallam's just releasing a podcast from prison, so I'd recommend you check that out. The first episode made me cry. So yeah, I guess there's lots of things that you could do, and talk to the women. I taught them how to meditate. One of the women in there were self-harmed one night, and so I spent a day, counseling her and running meditations, and I did yoga and had the women connect with that, like, hey, can you teach us yoga? And so I was teaching them yoga and making calls. I don't know. It's like I said, try it out. No. You're not allowed to say that. I think there's a whole lot of politics about it here. I don't know if there's as much politics about it there, but.
Well, we may get some questions about that. Keep the questions coming, people. We've got a couple of questions which are a little bit more bigger picture about strategy and the movement. So shift to that for a second. Someone said that they don't understand the strategy of XR Britain, that they just feel disappointment, and they're asking, can you please explain their strategy?
Yeah, I can really understand that, because when I first saw it too, I was like, what do you mean you're not doing what we're doing? And I think this is something really classic that happens around our movement, is that we have different strategies which mobilize different people. If you really listen to their words, they've been very careful that they didn't say that blocking roads was bad. They just said that the people have said that blocking roads is bad, and so they're going to not do it for a short period of time. And then they're sort of calling the bluff. Okay, if you don't want us to block roads, then we're not going to do it, but you have to join us in surrounding Parliament with 100,000 people, which is a fucking excellent tactic. That's an excellent tactic. And so I think that, yeah, cleverly, it's 100 days. That's right. So 100 days, they're not going to block it. That's it. It's not the whole shebang. It's a little bit. And I think, yeah, ultimately, I mean, let's look at what they did. They put up one Facebook post, and all around the world, we've all got a splash of media from it, of people like it's more shock tactics of like, we quit. No, they didn't quit. That wasn't a quit at all. They just said, we're not going to do it for 100. We're not going to do this specific tactic for 100 days. Instead, we're going to mobilize and then have 100,000 people around Parliament. I mean, I don't see, like, it can feel like a stab in the back, because we know that we want to be as radical as possible, but everybody who is with XR, who wants to do these radical tactics, should be joining the A22 network. Join your flank. And then the people that want to do the creative, other stuff, stick with XR. XR is actually, I think, super important in the movement. We need to fix our democracy desperately. Our current system of government, this party system where people are fighting against each other, is failing us ultimately, incredibly. And so I really believe in citizens' assemblies. I really believe in Extinction Rebellion. I really believe in fixing our democracy. And so us as the radical flank, we support them by being the radical flank, so that people choose XR who consider themselves moderate. Oh, I'm not radical. I'm just Extinction Rebellion. I hope that helped.
Cool, thank you. So another question a bit about the big picture of the movement. A person says 2019 was a real watershed year and showed the relationship between mass protest and direct action. They fed off each other. Could you tell us what role you think a minority of committed activists can play to rebuild a mass climate movement post-COVID?
Yeah, I mean, what role can we play? I think that's sort of continuation of the previous comment, which is that we are the radical flank. We're not here to be liked. We're here to make movements like Extinction Rebellion seem like the appropriate or less, more mainstream option. We build outrage, we generate attention, and it's really important that we're strategic. It's really important that we're strategic with our spokespeople. It's really important that we're strategic with our targets. It's really important that we're strategic with our legal plans. But I think ultimately, our job is to just demonstrate the urgency and to do that with our bodies.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask a few more of the questions that I pre-prepared. So, but keep the questions coming in the chat, people, because we've got a few more minutes left. So look, I was really curious to hear from you. Hopefully, coming out of prison, having gone through all of this, hopefully you have received a lot of attention, like media attention and so forth, you know, for the cause. So I was just wondering if you could say a little bit about what that experience has been like of having the spotlight on you, how it's gone dealing with the media, and just the effect that's had for you in your life as well.
Yeah, thanks. I think like the important thing with the media is every time you do a media interview, it is like doing an action. So, you know, it was pretty intense I was doing like 3 or 4 media interviews a day, which was a lot. I felt like a bit of a broken stay on message, always bringing it back to the climate emergency, always bringing it back to the reason I'm there. I didn't allow the conversation to deviate into what I thought of the judge or what I thought of X or Y. It was always about the climate emergency and the need for change and to fix our democracy. So I think, you know, just running down that line, with media, you know, stay humble, work with your team. When you're a spokesperson, so when you're the face of the movement, it's really important to remember that we are one limb of this community. And so we got to stay in the agreed messaging of the community. To, you know, like if you go into action and you've got a person who's agreed to do the flyering, and then all of a sudden they change the flyer on you and hand out a different flyer, you know, you'd be a bit upset. And so it's the same with person in media. You know, you want to remember that you're a limb of a bigger piece, and to liaise with community, and to do a pre-brief and debrief after the media as well, to reflect on how it went as much as possible.
Cool, thank you. I think we have another audience question that might have gotten sent to James in the chat. James, do you think you could unmute and read that question out for us? And that might be our last question.
Thanks, Michael. Sorry, I'm just having a little technical issue here. Give me 1 second. Yeah, okay, so I got the question come through. Hi, Violet. I chaired a rally last year against the New South Wales anti-protest laws, which I thought was a really good showing of opposition to state repression of climate activists. Interested to hear how you think we can continue to challenge these laws in 2023.
Great. So with any like campaign, there's multiple prongs of strategy. So obviously you need an actual legal team looking at repealing the law. And then you have your people who campaign to the people who are responsible. And then I think as us, the radical flank, our job is to be courageous and forget that those laws exist.
Yeah, look, final question before we close and actually talk a bit about what's next. Could you say a little bit about what's next for you, or perhaps what's next for the organizations you're involved in? Yeah, to get us kind of excited about, well, I guess starting this year of activism.
Yay. Hey, all the people who are on my side of the big body of water. So what's next with us? We have a chat tonight with Stop Fossil Fuel Subsidies. You can find out how to join us on that at 7 p.m. tonight. It's Stop FFS. It's like, for fuck's sake. stopffs.org. That's definitely fossil fuel subsidies, not and then for XR, I'm just going to spruik on the we've got this next sitting week, which is the 7th of February. There's going to be some outside Parliament stuff. So join XR ACT to get involved with that. If you're in Sydney, the Climate Coalition, we're all decentralized, so there's a bit of a list. The Climate Coalition is a really great place for you to connect in with. We have a New South Wales state election coming up, so always good to engage in that situation, however you feel appropriate. On Friday, March 3, there's a student strike here, Sydney, maybe New South Wales wide, so observe that. But ultimately for everybody else, we're here to fix democracy, which starts locally. So join a local group or create one. Be humble with that, okay? So it takes all of us to do it. Got to flyers, you've got to paint banners, you've got to, connect with your local group. Even me, as somebody who organizes internationally, nationally, I also have a local group that I go and paint banners and do all that running around and print flyers and all that stuff, because that family network is really important, local family network. So, and ultimately do art. I know that A22 doesn't necessarily prioritize art, but art is the armor of the peaceful. And so I would always recommend people engage with art as part of protest. That's us for what's next.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. So I've dropped into the chat. Hopefully you can all see that. So a couple of links relevant to that question of what's next. So there's the Facebook event there for the Stop Fossil Fuel Subsidies meeting. And is that 7 p.m. start? So is that starting now? Is that right, Violet? Well, I'm get there when you can. Anyway, if you'd like an intro to that campaign or questions.
It's in 1 hour.
Oh,
maybe?
it's in an right. Yeah, I'm probably tripped up by the time
No,
zones.
it is 7. Yeah. It's all
Okay.
good.
Right.
Something,
well,
check out our Facebook.
get along
Come
to
along.
that.
I host the ones that's Mondays at 1 o'clock. So you can come meet me Monday at 1 o'clock.
Cool. You can have more Violet there. So yeah, in half an hour time, if you're in Aotearoa, we've got an intro talk for the Restore Passenger Rail campaign. So if you'd like to know more about that, please just have half an hour break and then come along. You can click on the link I put in the chat. Yeah. So the only thing that remains is really to thank you, Violet, so much for making time to have some solidarity across with us here in Aotearoa. I've really appreciated just the many ideas you've thrown at us, but even more than that, just the passion and energy and the spirit that you embody. So yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, look forward to chatting more in the future.
Thanks so much. Thank you. And my number's on the Vanguard chat and Signal if you're in that, A22. If you want to talk, hit me up. Happy to connect with people and chat strategy. And thank you so much for inviting me as a setup. Like we've got to be in this together. We're neighbors, we're buddies, and this is part of our network. So you are all really important. And yeah, so good to be here.
Beautiful, one big family. And thank you, all of you, so much for coming, for sacrificing your evening, bringing your questions, attention. Much appreciated. Hope to see more of you all in the future. So that's us. I will ask Rachel to do a karakia to close off the space for us, but come back again for those meetings that I mentioned.
Thanks for coming,